The Qutub Minar was lit up with the vibrant colours of the Rwandan National flag on the 7th of April. United Nations observes this day as the International Day of Reflection on the 1994 genocide. India illuminated the iconic minaret in the national capital in solidarity with Rwanda on the solemn occasion of the genocide's 30th commemoration. As Rwanda is still healing from the wounds of its past, India's memorial gesture pays tribute to lives lost during the devastating 100-day massacre. As many as 800,000 people were killed and 2 million were displaced due to this genocide. Now, India has been very vocal about augmenting the voice of the global south in the international arena, whether it is by adopting a position of non-alignment during the Cold War era or advocating the inclusion of the African Union in the G20 just last year. When it comes to global south solidarity, we constantly strive to walk the talk. This gesture of remembering the Rwandan genocide and honouring its victims is a testament to India being a voice of the global south. And we'll talk about this with people who understand the space and its position. Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, former diplomat, with us on the program. Group Captain UK Devnath, former Indian Air Force and defence expert, also joins us on the show. Major General Sudhakar Ji, geopolitical, strategic and defence expert, with us on the program as well. Last but not the least, Mr. Pathakrit Pine, international affairs expert as well. Ambassador Mukherjee, I'll begin with you, ma'am. This is obviously not just about, remembering that terrible legacy that the world pays tribute to after 30 years of the genocide in Rwanda. This also reflects a lot about India and the character it intends to display when it comes to becoming the de facto, the default leader of the global south. We have seen such things happen on the Eiffel Tower, the Empire State Building, the Burj Khalifa. But India, by doing so, is obviously not only expressing solidarity, it is sending a message as well.
I completely agree with you. And it is heartwarming to see that India is finally also reaching out to Africa and understanding their tragic history. I was with the human rights in Geneva when this massacre happened. And it is important to remember that just like in India, the British colonialists and the French colonialists, when they went into Africa, they divided tribe against tribe, Hutu against Tutsi. So when this massacre happened, you have to trace it back to the tragic colonial history of Africa, which was left partitioned and bleeding just like India. And this gesture by India of illuminating the Qutub Minar, as you said, just the way Eiffel Tower is done, or Burj Khalifa, is a demonstration that India's leadership of the global south has come of age, and also that India's government, India's leadership, and the Indian people are beginning to also understand the tragic history of Africa and the need to show solidarity with Africa when such terrible events are remembered. The healing in as far as Rwanda is concerned has been rapid because of the present leadership in Rwanda. But the manner in which it was triggered like a matchbox, the moment the former president's plane was brought down, and the horrific killings and the manner of their killings sent shivers throughout Africa, because throughout Africa, the colonialists have divided tribe against tribe on the basis of warrior and non-warrior, exactly as the way they did it in India after 1857, when they divided us on the basis of collaborators who were called warriors and non-collaborators, the rice-eating Bengali or the rice-eating Madrasi, who were called non-warrior tribes. This was a way of divide and rule. So, in a way, this massacre, this genocide which happened, is also a reminder that people of the global south should not forget their history, their colonial history, and they should educate their children about their colonial history so that nobody in future generations forgets what the colonialists have done to the global south.
Pathakrit, what happened was obviously imperative to understanding how neglected the global south has felt. But do you think what India did during the G20 was, not strategic geopolitically, but it was also, an expression of empathy towards a part of the world where, most of the civilized world or the developed world considers still backward?
Vineet, what India did during the G20 by ensuring the inclusion of African Union is more of doing for those who have been deprived for centuries. And I think India continued with its effort throughout the pandemic time by giving vaccines, by being the first respondents on several occasions, and by being the voice of the global south, ensuring that on many occasions where their voice has never been heard in the last 50 years, India at least gives them, the right to speak or the courage to speak out by demonstrable actions that India itself is taking by defying often the European and the Western diktats. The International Day of Reflection should start with reflection on the very purpose of the existence of United Nations. I mean, what was United Nations doing during those days? Yeah, there can be certain excuses, this and that, but the very fundamental reason for which United Nations was created was to ensure that it creates a dispute resolution mechanism to ensure that disputes do not take the shape of conflicts and to preempt conflicts. In that respect, from 1947 or 48 onward, or rather 1945 onwards till date, United Nations has failed to prevent any conflict from taking a devastating shape. The second thing is this: 500,000 or perhaps almost 1 million people getting massacred. Imagine if even 1/10 of this happens in Europe. The whole Western media will ask the world that you must speak up, you must be concerned. They will impose sanctions, this, that. They'll ask you to take a stand. But when it comes to an incident like this happening in Africa, it becomes a news in Western media after the sports coverage and before the weather news. That is the level of relevance they have for your Africa. Even today, what have they done for Africa is a question mark. Even today, how much has Africa changed from the time when the Rwanda massacre happened? Even today, you will find civil wars happening. Even today, you will find that past colonizers are trying their best to ensure that their supremacy, their stranglehold in these countries continue. And let me tell you one thing, one of the reasons, Ambassador Ma'am beautifully explained that all of this that happened in Africa, or it's happening now, a legacy of the partition and destructive partition that was created by these colonizers of West who champion the cause of human rights today. On many occasions you will find in Africa, countries have straight line as borders. It was as if rulers were taken scale to completely partition countries, divide countries among the colonizers. So what happened of a particular tribe, 15%, 20% will be in another country and 80% will be in another country. And that's where the animosity, ill will and all those, century-old, disdain and that enmity would take shape of massacres, of persecution. So the fundamental issue again is this: when the Prime Minister of India talks about reforms in multilateral institutions, asking UN that you must speak for everyone, when he talks about reforms in institutions, including IMF and World Bank, the most fundamental question is this: apart from giving out a bit of dole-outs, what have these organizations done to fundamentally make Africa far better than what it was in 1990s? And how much voice the African countries even today have in United Nations? Who listens to them? And I'm telling you this, Vineet, even when African Union was included in G20, I am very sure many of the Western powerhouses grudgingly accepted it. They're not very happy perhaps to sit with the same countries with whom they still continue to exploit by taking their rare earth minerals, in return giving weapons so that you keep on fighting. I'm sure all of us know about the movie called Blood Diamond. And what was shown in that movie, Blood Diamond, was a reality. So when it comes to precious minerals, thank God we have good leadership in India, that today countries like India have aspired and told the Western countries, ultimately you have to invest in India, make it in India. Unfortunately, in Africa, they have been so much embroiled into their own conflicts, nobody could take a stand that if you take minerals from us, you need to ensure that the minerals are converted into finished products in our own country. And United Nations never did that. Do you see any movement by the United Nations to tell the countries, global country, major powerhouses, that you must contribute at least 30 to 40% of the manufacturing happening from those very countries in Africa from which you are extracting minerals? No, nobody. On the contrary, what happens, most of these countries are in debt trap. IMF and World Bank goes and does some kind of debt restructuring, which eventually puts them in a bigger debt trap. So when it comes to development of resilient supply chain, human resource development, nothing happens. What happens is this: some Hollywood celebrity will go once in a few years, make a impoverished child drink water, and then it will become a very big advertisement across the world. Look how America is helping and how Americans are very, very kind-hearted. Look how Hollywood is kind-hearted. So I think we need to come out of that. And this is what the External Affairs Minister has told to the Europeans, that Europe must come out of the mindset, Europe's problems are the world's problem, but the world's problems are not Europe's problem. This mindset has to change. Rwanda was not the Europe's problem. That's why nobody cared about Rwanda. So I think this solidarity move is just not symbolic, but it is far more profound than just the lighting of the Qutub Minar. India gave vaccines to all those countries who did not have the capacity to manufacture vaccines, especially at a time when the developed countries were hoarding vaccines. And we're upset that why is India giving the vaccine free or at a lower price? Because it hampers the revenue model of the entire market structure, where for every, say, something produced or manufactured for $1, they eventually end up selling at $50. So I think it's not just symbolic. I think it's a great rise that is happening. India, as voice of Global South, whatever India is doing, and I'm sure, Vinay, there are many powerhouses in the West who are not happy with it.
And
because we are becoming a voice.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. General Sudhakarji, the world for a very long period of time, has been focusing on these photo ops next to, the power-stricken ambience that you find so rampantly in African countries. But when it comes to brass tacks, it's only a few countries that have actually taken initiatives to make sure that the development of African countries is also something that forms a part of their national foreign policy. India is one of those very, very elite and few countries who have taken it upon them. And that is also the mark of a great big leader.
Vinit, good evening. Thank you for getting me to your show, and compliments to the previous co-panelists. Your question, I would say, is articulated beautifully, and you have made the point very well. All I would like to say is that let's understand the issue of strategic outreach by India to the African continent in the 21st century. I think it is superb. It's an excellent move by India, and it is not a rhetoric. It is a genuine outreach by our country to something which should have been looked at many, many years back. We are in the 21st century. We are mindful of the fact that the population of Africa, which was twice less than that of Europe in 50s, has become actually more than twice at the beginning of the 21st century. By end of 21st century, it is expected that the population of Africa is going to be 10 times more than what it is today. Rwanda is a landlocked country. It's an agrarian society and has got around 1.4 million population. And also it has got very, very exclusive in the rare earth material. Unfortunately, given the historical legacy of the colonial divide and rule concept which has been applied to the hilt, I would say that India is the only country which is standing out in the global order today with sincerity of purpose and taking everyone along. Having been the leader during the anti-colonial move, I think the time has come wherein the sincerity and the commitment of India can be best demonstrated by investing adequately in the people for the well-being and the development of the nation. So it's very important also to understand the challenges. The challenges today in Rwanda is that like the Ambassador Ma'am and Patikrit, they have beautifully covered. To my mind, the high density population in a limited area is the biggest challenge. Second is the unemployment. The industrialization is actually a figment of imagination there. The Western powers have been depleting all kinds of minerals in a country like Rwanda. They have not ensured the basic socio-economic development, be it the education or the livelihood or any other medical or the housing facility, the water facility, etc., etc. So perhaps India is doing a great job by extending all its assistance in terms of aid, grants, the technical enterprises coming in. Also, we are going in a slow but in a systematic and calibrated manner, not to usurp China, because China has got deep pockets. It has gone into Africa in a big way. And he who is looking at Africa today will be able to turn the table of the geopolitical orders which are emerging and changing by the day into multilateralism. Here is a golden opportunity that, besides being sincere in our purpose, we must reach out to our brothers and sisters and the people of Rwanda, not only Rwanda, all countries in Africa, and particularly Rwanda, so that a genocide which took place 30 years back doesn't get repeated in 21st century. Back to you, Vinith.
Right, you're absolutely right, sir. This is all boiled down to India's leadership qualities, hasn't it, Group Captain Devnath?
Oh, yes, Vineet, it goes beyond saying that India is now emerging as a global leader as far as Africa is concerned. We are very, very careful when it comes to global South countries. Not only in Africa, but Southeast Asian countries also, we are encouraging Indian investment without any fine print. It goes without saying that India is now recognized as one of those countries who will help any poor country, small country, without any selfish motive. As far as Africa is concerned, our Indian government is encouraging our entrepreneurs to go explore Africa and invest in Africa. In fact, investment by various Indian private bodies, our entrepreneurs in Africa has increased from $68 billion in 2011 to $90 billion last year. And our government ultimate goal is that by 2030, India must invest $150 billion worth of capital in Africa. We are not in competition with China. It has to be understood. China is investing in Africa to monopolize their trade and their political power in Africa. Whereas when India invests, our entrepreneurs, our government of India invests in Africa, we want to grow together with our friends in global South. We want that minerals of Africa must be utilized in a judicial way by all countries, including by India. But fair returns must be paid back and again flowed back into African economy. African countries are slowly realizing that India remains a fair partner in this game with absolutely no intention to exploit any African countries. Yes, Vineet?
Ambassador Mukherjee, Group Captain Devnath made a very important point that the comparison here is not with China. We are not trying to emulate China. We are trying to carve our own niche. We are trying to carve our own identity, and we have done that. We have established that through our unique and very popular foreign policy now. Do you think this is the right direction for India to head into?
Actually, in the African context, first let me underline the importance of what Patikrit had said, which was that the borders in Africa were drawn up in a merciless manner. So, for instance, you have two countries, one colonized by the French, one by the British, Nigeria and Benin, who both speak the same language, Yoruba, except that in Benin, they were not allowed by the French colonizers to keep their mother tongue. But when a Nigerian and a Beninoise meet, they speak Yoruba. They don't speak English or French. This is a very important example of what we call when borders bleed, which is how the Afghan border was drawn up, which is how the India-Bangladesh border was drawn up by the British. Secondly, there is no question of comparison between the Chinese and the Indians, because the Chinese went into Africa to exploit Africa's resources, and they took on, in a way, the role of a neo-colonialist, a neo-imperialist. Whereas when India went into Africa, and when India goes into Africa, it develops what is called sustainable development projects through huge grants of development cooperation, and they develop a project which is useful for the country, and they teach the Africans to administer it, and they leave the project when the project is ready for takeoff, which is the correct, sustainable way to have development cooperation. The Africans themselves have realized it. If you go look at the length and breadth of Africa, you see what the Chinese have done, which is to try to exploit the rare minerals in Africa. You look what the Indians have done. We've built bridges, housing. We've given, as one of my co-panelists said, free vaccines for COVID, etc. We have gone into Africa in the true spirit of development cooperation. So there's no comparison. But in this particular case, I want to reiterate and come back to the history behind the genocide, and to insist that the same politics of divide and rule which led to the partitioning of Africa, which led to the partitioning of India, still prevails in the colonial mind, and which is why they look at their ex-colonies still in an exploitative manner. So, I don't want to talk about China right now. I want to talk about the colonial mindset and how it still prevails. And in Africa, I assure you that throughout the length and breadth of Africa, this colonial mindset still prevails, which is why India, as leader of the global south, has had such a huge impact, and which is why our Prime Minister is so popular. And we had an Africa summit here some years ago, where we had every African head of state participating in Delhi. That's the difference between India and the rest, the ex-colonialists or China. India is miles ahead.
Absolutely. Pathakrit, what do you think of what Ambassador Ma'am just said, that the Western world still looking at Africa and African nations with that big partial prism of an exploitative mindset?
Of course, there is a huge exploitative mindset, and that's the reason, that many of these countries are a little wary that India has become the voice of the global south, giving courage to many of these global south countries to be equally defiant. You saw recently how the Guyana president spoke to the BBC journalist and exposed the hypocrisy of the West, where they lectured the rest of the world on climate change and at the same time ensured that the green technology remains very expensive. They ensure that you cannot use your coal for your own development, even though the West has used coal to the hilt for 300 years. And they also, ensure that they keep on triggering conflicts, where the amount of bombs that are dropped, God knows whether it, as per the West, harms the environment or purifies the environment. But the real issue is this. I think what India is doing is this. Apart from the help that India is giving out, I think India has also shown the template of development. From the verge of bankruptcy and a balance of payment crisis in 1991 to emerging as the fifth largest economy of the world by 2023. And right now we are almost a $4 trillion economy. I think whether you talk about the Mudra Yojana or the JAM Trinity, direct benefit transfer, ensuring human resource development, investing in education, investing in healthcare, and being firm in terms of having a democratic setup where your political leadership ensures that foreign investors, when they come in, are bound to invest here for the development of the host country. So I think regulatory authorities should be created. Education has to be a place where investment must be made. And you must also ensure that your diaspora plays a critical role in investment or development of your own native country. So I think the template that India is showing to the rest of the world the global south is as important as the help that India gives out.
Okay.
And it is important that India is saying you have to be firm on certain accounts. You cannot just bend your head every time the West says. The presumption that West knows the best, what is good for the rest must go.
Okay,
and India is showing the road.
All right. Concluding thoughts from Group Captain Devnath and General Sudhakarji, and then we wrap up.
Vineet, India has to move along with Africa. Africa has understood that India remains a benevolent friend without any interest, without any selfish interest. And Africa knows that slowly they have to come close to India as far as trade, commerce, especially exchange of scientific and technical knowledge is concerned. And we are moving very rapidly towards each other. It augurs well for continent of Africa and for India at large. Yes.
All right. General Sudhakarji, quickly, sir.
I would say that the national interest should be supreme for all countries to exercise strategic outreach of this nature. Allow me to say something in favor of India. I think India is doing the right step, right action, shaping the world order in its humble and best form, preparing itself for 2047. That is when we are looking at our country as a global power. To be a global power, we need to identify the extended neighborhood, which will be of relevance and contribute towards our status, as also to extend the rules-based international order we have been so loosely using all this while. Last but not the least, Africa, in my opinion, is the center of gravity, which is going to drive the geopolitics, the geoeconomics, and the geosecurity of the world order. Hence, India is making the right move, and particularly moving into the Central African region. This is the region which has got maximum countries under military rule. Perhaps democracy, in its true sense, is going to be injected into a place like Rwanda and thereafter spread further to the western coast. I think it's a big move by India, which will be applauded forever. Back to you, Vinay.
All right. Wonderful points by everyone. We've run out of time. Appreciate everyone joining us and sharing their special thoughts on this special show. We'll be right back.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.